Welcome to Combating Depression and Anxiety by Creating a Healthy Brain. My name is Jules Allen Rowland and I'm going to be your presenter on this topic. So this is just a little bit about me, but you can actually read all this information in my bio. So I'm not going to concentrate on this. I'm going to launch straight into the presentation because time is a little bit limited and there is lots to say about this particular topic. So when we're looking at brain health and how that ties into depression and anxiety, of course, what we want is depression and anxiety are symptoms of many variables that can feed into your life that create a manifestation of depression and anxiety. And one of the primary ones that we look at relates to how healthy our brain is. So when we look at brain health, we're looking at obviously firstly disease resilience, how resistant our brain is to the brain diseases, so Alzheimer's and Parkinson's would be two of them, but of course depression and anxiety are triggered by what we think and how we feel. Brain health relates to neurotransmitters. Now our neurotransmitters are chemicals that our neurons secrete. So what happens is that our neurons don't meet. There's actually a tiny weeny little gap between the neurons. So when there's going to be an impulse that travels along the neurons that creates a sensation or a thought or a reaction in our body or in our brain, our neurotransmitters are actually secreted by the nerves into the little synapse, the space, and the neurotransmitter choice is what creates a particular response. So for example, adrenaline is a neurotransmitter. When adrenaline is secreted into the synapse, the response that the body has is very reactive. You know, adrenaline is the get up and go. Adrenaline is the one that helps us with a fight or flight. So conversely, something like dopamine is another neurotransmitter. Dopamine is responsible for our motivation, for example. So whether we are satisfied in life, dopamine is responsible for that. Whether we're motivated, having healthy dopamine response is going to help us to be satisfied and be motivated. Serotonin is another one. We all know about serotonin. Serotonin is a feel-good neurotransmitter. And in fact, there are a lot of neurotransmitters. I'm not going to go into all of them. So for neuron health, so for brain health, we need various factors to be optimal in order for our brain to be healthy. So we want the myelin sheath, and that's like a plastic covering that covers our nerves. That must be healthy. We need cholesterol because our brain is made up of cholesterol. And if we don't get enough cholesterol, then the optimal impact on our brain is going to not be what we want it to be. Omega-3, so the myelin sheath and the nerves and those cells are dependent on omega-3 for health. Water. You know, we've all heard that our body is about 70% water, but our brain is too. So if we're dehydrated, then our brain is not going to respond properly. And of course, there are vitamins and minerals that our whole body needs, but I'm focusing on the brain here because the healthier the brain is, the less the imbalance may occur, and of course then it helps to reduce our chance of developing depression and anxiety if our brain and our nerves are healthy. So the manifestation in a healthy brain is the antithesis of depression and anxiety. So in a healthy brain, we've got motivation, we have clear thinking, we've got energy, we've got enthusiasm, we've got endurance. And each of these, and of course there are many descriptions that can come with a manifestation of a healthy brain, but all of these you can see when you're depressed or you're anxious, all of these as a manifestation of a healthy brain are going to be suboptimal. So just before I get into the presentation, please stay to the end because I am offering some special gifts, and obviously I would love to go through those gifts with you. So just stay until the end of the presentation. Now, the origins of anxiety and depression, really the foundational origin of anxiety and depression is a neurotransmitter imbalance. And remember I said the neurotransmitters, they're chemicals that are secreted in the synapse, which is the little space between the nerves. So in order for our neurotransmitters to be healthy, you need to give them what they need as a foundation. So let me just give you just one example of neurotransmitters and how just going on to, for example, an allopathic medicine, pharmaceutical, can be ineffective if the foundation of neurotransmitter balance is not there. Now, we all know of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So something like Prozac, for example, is an SSRI. And what the SSRIs do is that they delay I'm going to call it the suck up of the neurotransmitter when the body's finished using it. And basically what happens is that once the neurotransmitter has been secreted into the space, when the body's finished using it, the little nerve actually sucks that neurotransmitter back into the nerve. And what the SSRIs do is they selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So they delay that withdrawal of serotonin. And the theory, which actually they've subsequently disproved, but the theory is that if they delay the serotonin, they allow the serotonin to remain in the synapse for longer, then it's going to help combat depression. But if you have low levels of serotonin to start off with, and the body's not secreting enough serotonin to start off with, then an SSRI is not going to work, because if you don't have enough serotonin, there's not going to be any benefit to delaying the reuptake, because there isn't enough to start off with. So when we're looking at depression, for example, and the standard treatment of depression, we need to address how much neurotransmitter there is in the first place and how healthy the neurotransmitter is before we can even think that any pharmaceutical allopathic medicine is going to help us. So in this presentation, I'm going to discuss 5 don'ts. In other words, habits and activities we may have that are damaging to our brain, and 5 do's. So habits and activities we can add that are going to benefit our neurotransmitters. So the first one is don't drink your calories. So if you're going to give up one thing and it's going to have a far-reaching impact on your health, including your brain health, it's going to be drinking cool drinks. In every can of Coca-Cola or any of these fizzy drinks, there's approximately 9 teaspoons of sugar in a can. There's actually as much in fruit juice. Now, why is this important? It's because, and you're going to hear me talk about insulin again and again. Insulin is a messenger. Basically what it does, it helps the body to carry sugar into the cell. So it's important. But when there's a lot of insulin, the body has a condition called insulin resistant. The body becomes resistant to insulin. And the brain works in the same way. If your body's constantly flooded with insulin, then all the cells become insulin resistant. And then each cell effectively becomes functionally starving, because it's almost like if you are in a situation where your children are nagging, and you just stop hearing them, the cell does the same. If you constantly flood your cell with sugar and your body has to produce a lot of insulin, the constant flood of insulin creates a negative response in the cell, where the cell starts to reduce the receptors to insulin so that there's not this constant influx. Now, effectively, this has far-reaching effects in the body. So not only physically in terms of liver damage and what we call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but also with regard to the brain. But if you're going to give up your cool drinks, please don't swap your cool drinks for diet drinks, because there is an association with diet drinks. So, for example, that would be aspartame or phenylalanine with cancer. The other thing is aspartame is an excitatory neurotransmitter. So it's a little bit like sitting in your car and revving your car engine and then being surprised that your car engine burns out. The nerves in the brain are the same. If you constantly flood them with these excitatory neurotransmitters, you basically burn your nerves out. And again, if you're looking at keeping optimal brain health so that you don't have a sense of anxiety or depression, you need to make sure that your neurotransmitters remain in optimal health. So point number 3 of the don'ts, don't have a high carbohydrate breakfast. And this is because, and really you're going to hear me speak about insulin a lot. When you have a high carbohydrate breakfast, it spikes your insulin, and this spike in insulin affects the choice of protein that goes across the blood-brain barrier. So the body has a protein compound that carries protein across the blood-brain barrier, because the blood-brain barrier is designed to be impermeable to just anything. It's very selective about what it allows into the brain. Insulin affects that carrier, so for the bus that carries that protein across. And what it does, in actual fact, it creates too much serotonin in the brain. Now, that sounds like it should be a good thing, but too much serotonin in the brain has the same impact as too much insulin in the body. Eventually, the brain starts to desensitize itself to serotonin, and low serotonin in the brain leads to depression. So it's very important to not spike insulin. Also, high carbohydrate breakfasts are very low in nutrients. So I'm pretty certain that most of you, if you have a high carbohydrate breakfast, you're hungry in 2 hours. And that's because they're so low in nutrients that the body and the brain are not being fed the vitamins and the minerals that they need for optimal function. Point number 4, don't eat 5 small meals a day. Now, I know very often if you've been to a dietitian, you've consulted with a dietitian, and the dietitian has said to you, in order to balance your insulin, you need to eat 5 small meals a day. Well, technically, this is true. Technically, it will balance your insulin. But the problem is that you do not want to be in a state where you are constantly flooded with insulin. And if you eat 5 small meals a day, your body is producing insulin all the time to manage those 5 small meals. Now, this flood of insulin creates insulin resistance, which I've spoken about. It affects the blood-brain barrier, what crosses the blood-brain barrier, because insulin is a messenger. It tells the body, store energy. So when you've got this constant messenger of store energy, you're going to gain weight, and then excess fat creates systemic inflammation, and systemic inflammation creates brain inflammation. So you get this negative knock-on when you're eating too frequently or you're eating meals that are too high in carbohydrate. So even if you eat 5 healthy meals in a day, it has the same impact on producing this constant exposure to insulin, which is very deleterious to brain health and to your body health as well. So point number 5 of the don'ts is don't snack. And we're back to the insulin story. So it goes back to the 5 small meals a day. You need long periods between meals where you don't eat at all, so the body doesn't produce insulin. So if, for example, you have your main meal and then 2 hours later you have tea with a little biscuit, then you have lunch. Then you have afternoon tea, also maybe with a banana or an apple, and then you have dinner. Effectively, even though they're not 5 classic meals a day, when you're snacking, every time you snack, your body produces insulin. Every time your body produces insulin, it affects what goes across the blood-brain barrier. It affects insulin resistance. It leads to weight gain, and weight gain leads to high inflammation. Bear in mind, too, when you become insulin resistant, then, because the insulin is not carrying the sugars into the cell, those sugars remain in the blood, and sugar is very pro-inflammatory. So that slow increase of inflammation in the body affects your risks of what I call non-communicable diseases. So, for example, they would be heart disease, stroke, cancer, osteoporosis, all of those diseases. But in actual fact, depression is one of the most researched problems on Google. So in other words, if you go into Google and you want to see what are the hits, depression is people look for their solutions on depression very, very frequently in Google, because a lot of people struggle from depression. But what they believe is that if they struggle from depression and they just take an antidepressant, it's going to solve their problem. But again, it's a little bit like building a house on boggy ground. If you've got boggy ground, in other words, an unhealthy body, and you then start putting bricks on that, in other words, taking medication that you're hoping is going to help you build your house, you can't be surprised if your house starts to sink because it's built on boggy ground. So let's move off the don'ts now, the negatives, and look at the do's. The first do is eat protein for breakfast. The reason for this is when we sleep, our body uses protein, stored protein, so that could be from our muscles or from our organs, and it uses the protein for the wear and repair. So we do all our wear and repair while we're sleeping. But now what happens is when we wake up, we need to replace that. So to eat a protein for breakfast is going to help the body replace the protein that it used for wear and repair. The second thing is cortisol. So cortisol is a hormone, and it's released in a stressed situation. So when you're very stressed, we know we're very anxious when we're stressed. So cortisol, and having balanced cortisol and proper cortisol spikes helps our body balance our mood and anxiety, and protein is needed to make cortisol. Third, protein is needed to synthesize neurotransmitters, and neurotransmitters are extremely important for balanced mood. And of course, when we eat protein for breakfast, it slows the insulin spike. So where eating a carbohydrate-heavy breakfast is going to spike your insulin, eating a protein-heavy breakfast slows the insulin spike. So your body's not flooded with insulin, and the tendency to develop issues like insulin resistance is obviously going to be slowed. Not only do we want to eat protein for breakfast, but we want to eat protein and fat at every meal. So fats and proteins are our building blocks, effectively. Fat is very important for our cell membrane, and it's extremely important for a healthy brain. So cholesterol is very important to create a healthy brain. So those people who are on statins need to make sure that their cholesterol doesn't drop so low that it starts to create a situation where their brain is not receiving enough cholesterol for the neurons. Protein and fat at every meal slows the insulin spike. So for example, let's say you're going to lash out and you're going to have a hamburger. If you add avocado to that hamburger, it slows the insulin spike. Now that doesn't mean you must go and have lots and lots of hamburgers, but if you add a good quality fat to a meal, it's definitely going to help the impact of that meal on the body slow down. It helps satiety as well, so we feel full quicker and for longer. Also, the protein and fats, good fats, add omega-3. And the other thing is our fats are what carry our vitamins A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. These are our fat-soluble vitamins. So if we're on a very low-fat diet, our body is not absorbing those fat-soluble vitamins, the ADEC. So slowly we get related to problems. So we all know, for example, that vitamin A is important for eyes. If you're on a very low fat diet, then the impact over time on eyes, because of the reduced vitamin A, it can start impacting us. I mean, that's just one of the examples. I can't go into all of them, but there are many, many long-term deleterious effects if you are on a low fat diet. So vegetarians need to be very careful that they consume enough protein and consume enough fats, because Twinkies and Coca-Cola are vegetarian. And very often if you've made a decision, okay, well, you're not going to eat meat for whatever your reasons are, sometimes you tend to resort to breads and junk food. And I mean, we know what the impact of junk food is. So just because you're vegetarian doesn't mean to say you're vegetarian and healthy, because very often one isn't. Point number 8, drink half a glass of water regularly. The body responds better when you have a little bit of water more often than you have a lot of water less often. And we need water. Our brain needs water because our brain is predominantly water. But we need water to wash out our kidneys. We need water to wash out the toxins, because our brain is also extremely sensitive to toxins. So drinking half a glass of water regularly just helps to wash out the kidneys. The other thing is that when we drink water, it also helps us to feel full. So if you're hungry, sometimes we're not actually hungry, we're thirsty, but we might not be associating what we feel with thirst. We tend to know we need something and just assume that it's going to be food. It's always good to drink filtered water, because in actual fact, tap water can be filled with a lot of toxin. Point number 9 of the do's is just to take a moment. When you take a moment out of your day, and it's best to take many moments, you help to reduce the stress. And how many of you are aware that when you are stressed, you can't think properly? It's almost as though our brain shuts down when we're stressed. So taking moments throughout the day just to calm down, it helps to lower our cortisol spike and it helps to lower adrenaline. The other thing, just taking a moment, so when cortisol is low, our adrenaline is low, it allows our neurotransmitters to just flow calmly. Because both cortisol and adrenaline are involved in the fight or flight response. And when we are in a stress response, the body doesn't know, does it need to turn and fight or does it need to run away? And it readies the body for it. So what it does is it actually drains blood away from the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of our brain, and it drains it into our limbs. Because, of course, either we're going to need to have enough blood and response in our limbs so we can fight, or in our legs so we can run away. So any kind of a stress response, we know it actually just means, can we even remember our name? I don't think we can even do that when we're in a stress situation. And the other thing is, when we're stressed, it tends to exacerbate depression. So when we're stressed, because it influences our neurotransmitters, it makes our depression worse. So depression and anxiety, when we're stressed, are much more likely to rear their ugly heads than if we're not stressed. So I generally suggest that you set a ping on your phone, and when your phone pings, you just stop what you're doing. Obviously not if you're driving, but you just stop what you're doing and you breathe and you focus on something that is pleasant. You think of something that you can be grateful for. I do it sometimes if I stop at any robot, that's the time where I breathe and I slow my brain down and I slow my heart down and I look around and I'm grateful for the fact that I'm alive, and it just helps to reduce that frantic response we have just to living our normal lives. And the last one is eat real food. And this is so important. I should have put it first, actually, because eating real food, so often what we eat is not real food. It's processed food. And processed food is loaded with trans fatty acids. It's loaded with too much salt. It's loaded with additives. So food additives and food preservatives. And the food is not real. And all of those additives, preservatives, and that impact on our brain health. Commercial oils, for example, are very pro-inflammatory. So the sunflower oils, the canola oils that are used in pre-prepared food or processed food, they're very inflammatory, and that affects our brain health. So the E's, when you look at processed food and you look at the back and you see it's got E350 and E270, and all these E's affect our neurotransmitter health. And the thing with neurotransmitters is they work together. So very often you might find, for example, adrenaline and dopamine might work together. So our neurotransmitters, what happens to one influences what happens to all of our neurotransmitters. So even though we might be depressed and we think it's really just related to serotonin, it's not. It's related to so many of our other neurotransmitters as well. And processed food, as I said, it's got preservatives in it. And for me to put something in my body that's designed so that the food that I'm eating can live on the shelf for a year, I definitely have a problem with that. So eating, you want to eat a rainbow, lots of color, fruits, vegetables, food that's alive, food that is as close to its raw state as possible, or very lightly steamed, good quality fats, good quality protein. If you can get pasture raised proteins, that's obviously best, because they're not, then the cattle and all that is not fed antibiotics and hormones, because you don't want those in your body either. And then the vegetables too, if you can go for organic, that's obviously first prize. It's not always easy to get organic, but that is first prize. So please note the special gifts, the fridge chart, foods to eat and avoid, 20% off a health consult with me. You can email me directly with regard to that. And then 10 tips, a health support booklet. Enjoy these. They are given with my gratitude for listening to this presentation. So thank you very much. These are my contact details. You can email me with your points, your discussions, questions, any problems. I would love to hear from you.